sort of working, but you have to
Yeah,
kind of eat
I
it.
think it's working.
You have to get pretty close, I think.
Okay, good morning, school board. My name is John Gadd. I've lived in Pleasant Grove for 24 years. I wanted to talk this morning about the MGT study. I think I've been here 3 times to talk about it, so this is my 4th time. The first time I mentioned when you first were going to have those community meetings, that the enrollment data inside the MGT study is seriously flawed. So Alpine School District's enrollment projections as of this year, the current projections, are that over the next 5 years you'll have 715 new students in the Alpine School District. That's 143 students per year. In the final MGT feasibility study that came out recently, they project that over the next 10 years you'll have 8,045 students. That's an average of 805 students per year. So the district's projections are that you'll have 143 new students per year, and the MGT study is based on a projection of 805 students per year. So that's off by more than a factor of 5. So the concern here is you have this feasibility study that you're going to make a bunch of decisions based on, but the data in this study, by your own projections, is seriously off by more than a factor of 5. And so, you know, if you're going to make decisions based on a study and the study's based on data and the data's wrong, then it's likely that your decisions are going to be wrong. The other concern I have about the MGT study is based on a bunch of grammar requests that I did and emails and documents that I received in response to that grammar request. My concern is that this study is biased and rigged. In your public video that you posted on your website, the superintendent repeatedly said that you hired MGT as an out-of-state company from Florida because they're professional and they're a third party and they would be unbiased. He said that repeatedly. But this study is not unbiased because it's clear from the 615 emails I got back and all the documents that went back and forth that your business administrator and other administrators repeatedly sent unsolicited data to MGT and repeatedly demanded that MGT modify their study process, their study questions, their study results, their study presentation to conform to the data that your business administrator sent them. So we don't have this unbiased study. This study is biased. It was rigged from start to finish. So those two concerns, the study has bad data, the study was rigged, and you should not use a deeply flawed study as a basis to make a decision on a district split. Instead, you should acknowledge that the study is flawed and you should set the study aside and take a step back and not try to push a district split onto the ballot based on this deeply flawed study. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next is Paula Hancock, followed by Doug Courtney. And I think you're aware that you have 3 minutes.
So first of all, I want to thank you as board members for your service to the community. It can certainly be a thankless job at times. The MGT study, while it had some flaws, was valuable to study the various options and allow your constituents to review the impact of various scenarios. As a city council member in Lehigh, there were certain scenarios that made sense to us right out of the way, and there were others that made absolutely no sense, like a Lehigh-only district. That was one that was easily removed from our analysis. As I've worked through this issue with our own city council, as well as city council members from other cities, the one thing I've learned is that we all want what's best for our children, which I know is a shared belief with all of you. Having been on the city council for 10 years, I never thought that the most consequential decision I would make as a city council member would be involving a school district split. Yesterday, over the course of the day, there were 9 cities across the school district that gathered to pass 2 different interlocal agreements that passed unanimously, 49-0. These interlocal agreements were essentially in support of option number 4 that was put forward by MGT and are going to be placed on the ballot via an interlocal instead of the school board to allow our residents to vote independently of our other cities influencing our future. I firmly believe that the three districts that could be formed will be strong and viable. More importantly, they allow each district to face their each unique challenges. West having hypergrowth, the central district that would be formed being a little bit more stable, and East dealing with some declining student population. My ask today of the board is that you allow the cities to pick up the baton from here and take this initiative to the ballot without confusing voters with a competing initiative. As part of that, I would also ask the board to support the tax increment lease revenue bond combination that is being proposed or discussed to be taken to the board in August to fund the high school that is needed in the West. I realize that as a Lehigh potential district that would not be part of that we would then carry that part of that bond with us, but it's the right thing to do. And as a city council member, I'm going on record now that I would support that, even though we would be responsible for a school that would need to be part of our district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Doug, Courtney, followed by Brian King.
Comments largely mirror the gentleman from Lehigh's. I'm a member of the Highland City Council. I won't run through the full set of comments again. I will just highlight that 9 of the 14 cities in Alpine unanimously voted essentially in favor of option 4 yesterday. I have an obligation to my city of Highland. You have an obligation to the Alpine School District. I'm not asking that you set aside that obligation, but I am asking that you give serious weight to that unanimous decision from 9 of the cities yesterday as you make your deliberations and your final decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Brian King, and then Jared Graves.
Good morning. I'm Brian King from Saratoga Springs. Some of you know me, but most of you know my wife. Apparently I'm not good with this. I had the opportunity of being at the meeting with Saratoga, Eagle Mountain, and Fairfield last night, and just wanted to relay how excited, or the feeling of excitement there. I think sometimes we think of this as a split, that's the word that's used, right? And we are dividing things. But in my opinion, we're simply dividing those problems, kind of like Paul talked about. We have 3 distinct problems: high growth, kind of a steady state, and then a decline in some of the enrollment areas. And this allows us to get there with the proposals that have been brought forward. I think for me, one of the things that's important is realizing we have the opportunity, instead of building walls to try and protect against this, we can build bridges. I had the opportunity on Saturday to ride my bike from my house in Saratoga all the way to Linden. I had hoped to go to Orem, but I couldn't make it that far in the time that I had. And what I noticed there was those underpasses, overpasses, different bridges really connected the communities. And while there's a difference in each of those communities, there was a beauty in being able to see them from each other's perspective. And I think we have the opportunity now, rather than try and stop, prevent, push back, is to go after what bridges can we build? How can we set up the kids for the best success, and the teachers, like you talked about, Sarah? And that would be my hope, that you'll take that and do that in the time, rather than focus on building walls and putting up ways to prevent. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Jared.
I really don't have a lot to add, but I do want to say thank you to all of those. I've developed great relationships and had the opportunity to have great conversations with many of you, and including many of the constituents from other cities. I should state my name for the record, Jared Gray from Eagle Mountain. I apologize. And I also just wanted to add with Mr. Hancock from Lehigh that, boy, we really need that high school, and I'd encourage you to please help us in that regard. I know our hopes is for the children, and I would echo that we need to do what's right for the children throughout the district. So please consider that as we move forward. And again, I want to thank you guys for your service, and appreciate that we are all here trying to do the same thing, and that we can do this together. I think we are in a great position to work together. And I did want to say one other thing. We couldn't be here without having tough conversations. And one thing that I've learned from the state level is, please disagree better. It's okay to disagree, but disagree better. Have those conversations, but respect each other in that process. Something that I've learned throughout this, is to be able to respect and say tough things without saying it personally. So I appreciate you guys doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've had a lot of really thoughtful, good comments. We appreciate that. And I would like to echo what was just said about disagreeing better. We would like to have wonderful conversations all over the district for the coming few months and try to arrive at some solutions that will benefit all of us the best. So now, as we begin to move into the action items, I think we need to give our public a quick review of where we're coming from. We hired the MGT study, and they have reported back to us a couple of times. Last week, they came and reported back to us, and then on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, we called a board meeting to discuss those findings. And at that time, we looked at all 6 options, and we eliminated several that we felt like were not in the best interest of our public. And one of them was option 6, which was Lehigh only, and so on. And so the discussion has been, should we put one thing forward or 2 items forward? And we will be discussing that again today. And so as we move forward, I've asked Dr. Farnsworth to give us a little overview of the timeline involved here.
Thank you, President Hacken. So as you indicated, the board met last week in a work session and decided this day was previously set aside for a second work session if necessary. And we were ready, I believe, after the work session to move to a board meeting to make a determination. And because meetings had been freed up to allow this, we decided on today as the board meeting. Our understanding of the statute, and this is an evolving understanding as we continue to look at the statute and study the statute, as other municipalities look at the statute and study it as well, is that what we're doing today is making a board determination as to what option we will, or options we will send to the county for certification. The county has 5 days to certify that. What that county certification means, we believe, is giving us permission to go forward and begin the process of soliciting public input on an option or options. That new law takes effect May 1st. Once the board makes their decision today, after May 1st, on May 1st, we will send that to the county for certification. And then our intended schedule is on May 14th to present those options to the public to start the 45-day public input period. We have scheduled a June 11th board meeting. It's our intention to have a public hearing on that day as required by statute. We also have an item on the agenda today to establish a second board meeting on June 25th for a second public hearing. We have also on June 28th, if we begin the process on May 14th, the end of that 45-day period would be June 28th. The board would need to act within 14 days of that time to make a final determination on what to put on the ballot. And we have scheduled, you see there, a proposal to have another board meeting in July, on July 12th, to make that final determination as to what the board would put on the ballot for voter consideration. So this begins a process to authorize the board to send it to the county for certification so that we can begin the public hearing process. But the final decision on whether or not an initiative would be put on the ballot, the board intends to make that on July 12th.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Farnsworth. Before we actually move to putting a motion forward, we have, as a board, have discussed previously that we like information before we have a motion. And so we would like to invite the district to give us their recommendation at this point based on their own study of the findings.
Thank you. We met yesterday and followed a similar process to the board. We looked at all 6 options. And I think the staff, the district leadership team, is in a unique position in that, unlike cities and unlike board members, we don't represent a particular area. We represent the employees and the patrons, the students of Alpine School District, as you do collectively. So as we looked at all of those options, we eliminated some that we didn't feel were in the best interest of the patrons and the students of Alpine School District. And those were our guiding principles. What options allow for the well-being of our patrons and our students, which would maximize those if the district were to be reconfigured. As we review that information, as we review the findings of MGT, the discussion on the board, it is our recommendation that the district remain as a one consolidated district. We believe that that is the best configuration to best meet the needs of all students. As we bring the board together and the communities together to work collectively, that allows us to maximize the economies of scale. However, we understand that there are other variables that ought to be considered that the board members and cities are wrestling with, and the feedback that we receive from the study is that our patrons want an initiative on the ballot. We understand that desire could be felt for many reasons. One, to get the issue addressed. There could be strong feeling to allow the voters to look at that. So our determination, if the board is to move forward on studying a configuration, we believe that the best option going forward to support all communities and students would be option 3. And some of the discussion, the variables in that is, if you look long term, we believe 2 of the most significant drivers in a district are population, where it is and where it's going, and the adjusted taxable value of that area. The student population drives the WPU. The adjusted taxable value allows for increments and other resources to flow into the district. Consequently, option 3, we believe, sending Saratoga, Eagle Mountain, Fairfield, and Cedar Fort in one district and Lehigh East in another district allows for a balance there. The area west would have significant growth over a period of time. They are projected to grow for the next 40 years. There's significant land out there that would allow for that to be a thriving district. Lehigh East has more of a stable population. Because of declining enrollment in some areas, increasing enrollment in others, it stays fairly balanced in enrollment over a significant period of time, insofar as we can project. The taxable value of the West is going to grow significantly, is projected to grow exponentially. In the East, it is also going to grow, but not as significantly. So those are some factors we looked at. We believe that the challenges that those geographical areas in the West would face are fairly similar in terms of enrollment, capital needs, and facilities, and the East would face similar challenges. The populations may evolve and communities may revive at different times, but that larger population would allow for a balance over time for those communities to adjust to population changes and capital needs. We do feel that the West would be a little bit disadvantaged at first because of the capital needs, so our recommendation is that the board go through the lease revenue bond process and the truth in taxation and start building that high school so that it is in place if there were a separation. That would allow the West to address their capital needs without the burden of building a new high school. With the new junior high coming on and the new high school coming on, we feel that would reduce the stress of their capital needs and allow them to build that tax base and their capital base to provide for their ongoing needs in a more sustained way. Again, I think it's the long-term sustainability. I think in a 3-way, the West would be fine, the North would be fine. I think the South would be a little disadvantaged in terms of student population and how that would affect them. And so as we wrestled through that, we felt in a unanimous way that the option 3, if the board is to consider one of these options on the ballot, is in the long-term best interest of all students and patrons.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Farnsworth. At this point, let's move to action item number 1 with those ideas in mind. It says determination of configuration, and then there's an S in parentheses. That means we could put one thing forward or possibly more than one thing forward. So do I have a motion now for moving forward one of those configurations?
I move to send forward both the configurations of options 3 and 4 to Utah County for certification.
Okay, hold on. I think that's two separate motions. I would like one configuration at a time. So it says, can we do that in two separate motions, please?
Sure. I
So-
move to send the configuration option 4 to Utah County for certification.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, so it's been moved by Stacy, seconded by Joy Lynn, and now we have an opportunity for discussion. So Stacy, it was your motion. Why don't you go first?
Thank you. So I think the most significant thing here is that we want to have conversations. We want to give the patrons who will vote the most comprehensive look that we can. If we send forth option 4 as one of our options, that gives everybody the opportunity to see the capital needs as well as the M&O. My concern with the MGT data is one data point, one snapshot of a fiscal year. It didn't include capital, right? So when we talk about how people were surveyed and the options they were given one portion. When we do our budget, we have both our operations budget and our capital budget. We consider both in tandem. Also, in relation to the cities who have formed interlocal agreements, right now there is not an interlocal agreement for the South. And so I believe that it is responsible, fiscally responsible and prudent of us to say, here's all the information so that as taxpayers are looking at both options 4 and 3, that they can be fully informed when we make that decision. Also noted in the information that we got at 10 o'clock last night, it did not include capital information in option 4. So a little hard to make a better decision without all of that information. So I really do believe that if everybody here is invested in our students, keeping them first, trying to take care of our teachers, that we'll do the right thing and we'll give people two options worth of information.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Joy Lynn, would you like to make a comment? And then we'll open up to the rest of the board.
I really kind of struggled and done a lot of thinking, so I'm going to take a point of, I don't know, I'm going to be a little long and I apologize. As I woke up at 4:30 this morning, it dawned on me as the sun started to rise that across this district that there were educators waking up and prepping lessons and adjusting lessons. And I know this because as a teacher, there were many, many mornings I woke up at 4:30 and prepped and adjusted lesson plans. And I am grateful for those teachers across the district that take the time to do that. I also reflected on my own teaching career. I taught at Windsor Elementary. It's a beautiful school. One of the things I loved about teaching at Windsor was I had a full bank of windows that ran the whole wall of my classroom, almost from 2 feet up to the ceiling. It was beautiful, the amount of light that came into that room. And there were 4 outlets in that room, one on each wall. And I reflect on that in teaching in today's world. One, those beautiful bank of windows are a security issue. Because if I had to do a lockdown in that room, I don't know where I would lock down with my students where they weren't in line of sight with those windows. And also, as I look at the technology needs, and I taught in that building in the 90s, and I still was plugging. My husband's in the fire department. He's going to kill me. I was plugging in tons of splitters into those outlets to meet the technology needs in that room. And that continues to increase. So I sit and I look at the needs of my friends in Orem, having taught at Windsor and having taught at Bonneville, and the needs of those older buildings. I don't believe any building for an elementary school in the district should probably be older than me. Just thinking about the needs of what they were then and now. I went to school in one of those open schools too, so that's a whole nother story. Then I thought about my later teaching career, and I taught science. And I had 26 kids in my class. And those 26 kids, I could divide them up into labs, and we could run 6 lab stations with 4 kids in a lab with a couple little extras, because your math isn't quite straight there. But that was tricky. Because 4 kids in a group, there's always the one group kid that's just sitting there and not doing anything. And 2 are working pretty hard and one's kind of floating in. A better configuration in a science lab is 3 kids. I can keep 3 kids busy in a lab station. And then I went to my daughter's school for student-teacher conferences. Just a couple weeks ago, she's in junior high at Lake Mountain, and the science teacher said that he had 38 kids in his science classes. and I couldn't configure in my brain how to run a lab. All of my teaching experience, and I couldn't figure out how to run a lab at the 38 students. And then at the convention that I went to on Saturday for way too many hours, I sat next to a science teacher there who teaches at Westlake. And she said, I teach chemistry, and next year, today, all of my classes have 45 kids enrolled in them. That's not any growth, that's just where it is. And I got thinking, 45 kids, well, okay, if I'm going to put my teacher hat on, how do I do that? I guess I run stations, and half the kids do a lab one day and half the kids do bookwork one day, and then I swap it. So now my kids have half the lab opportunities that you need in chemistry to be successful. And then I thought, well, maybe some more portables, but the portables don't come with science labs. So we are absolutely limited. So I do not believe that a large school means large class size, unless you run out of classrooms in the large school, and then you have no choice but to do large classes. And I moved out to Saratoga Springs, and I apologize, it's long, I know, in 1999. I moved out there early. I moved out there because I loved the rural. People say, well, you moved out there, you knew the growth was coming. I had no idea the growth was coming. I moved out there because there was a lake and some farmland, and my kids could run, and that's what I wanted. But my oldest and my youngest are 15 years apart. And when my oldest sat in math classes and science classes in junior high and went into high school, it was often that she would come home from the first day of school, well, Mom, I'm going to have to run from one class to the next so I can make sure I can be there early enough to get a desk. The classes were large then. We've done a lot of building. We've done a lot of growth. Sarah has pointed out to me we have spent significant amounts of money on bond in my area. But I'm hearing the same story with my youngest, who is 15 years younger than her sister. Mom, I have to run to my next class so that I can get a desk. So though we have built a lot, we haven't kept up with the growth. And it is really hard to send teachers, and it is really hard to send students to that every day. Sarah said that we're not deciding today. Today we're just starting and formalizing a process of continuing to gather more public information. Yesterday, over 50 public officials unanimously, and I listened to some of their meetings, and I attended meetings in the two cities that I represent, said that we stand and we support growth, and we want to look at option 4. We want to see what that configuration looks like. We didn't have that data last week. We didn't have that data in the MGT study, but we should honor those 50 elected officials that said, we're going to work together. They weren't angry. There wasn't animosity towards us. There was just, we have to figure out ways to solve the issues. We have to stand together. So I am asking that we don't decide today to not look at option 4 and just look really narrow as we go into the public hearing period. We will only come out with one option at the end of the public hearing period. We can only put one option on the ballot. And we don't need to make that decision today to just stay at 2 districts. I think we owe it to our communities. We owe it to the elected officials that represent people just like the 7 of us do, to continue to study both a 2-district reconfiguration and a 3-district reconfiguration. Last night I climbed into bed at 9:45. Apparently that was 15 minutes too early to see all of the capital data. So I looked at it this morning, and I'm concerned with some of it. I'm trying to decide through some of it, to decipher through some of it. So today I ask that we continue studying, that we took a funnel approach. We started with 6 options, and now we're down to 3 options. And on July, and I don't, 12th, it's on one of these pieces of papers, that we then narrow what we're going to put on the ballot. But that we owe it to the people that live at Windsor or attend Windsor and Springside and Alpine Elementary to make sure that we don't prematurely say, I'm not going to look at data points as I move forward.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Other comments?
Sarah, can I make a point of?
Yes.
It is our understanding, we've read it a couple times, we've talked to the county, that 2 proposals could be sent to the county for certification for public feedback to begin that process. The statute reads as if there is one coming forward. I believe all the interlocal agreements will have a single option that they're considering. I think the board members just need to be aware that is our understanding, but this statute is new and we get clarification as we get into the process. So there may be some adjustments to that if the board were to go through with two. We have contacted the county. They have confirmed that they don't believe that's in violation of the statute. So, but there may be some concerns there once we begin that process and they see what we're going through.
So that's just my ask, and that's why I seconded the motion, that we continue to look at two options and continue to narrow down.
Thank you. Are there other comments by board members? Sarah?
I just mainly have a question for Superintendent, as he talked a little bit about the staff recommendation. I'm just curious of how a 2-district competing with a 3-district split in terms of recruiting and retaining teachers how that would affect all the teachers in Utah County.
I don't know. Never been through that and couldn't predict what that would be. MGT, who has looked at the variables, said a 3-way split is more complicated than a 2-way split, and I believe that to be the case, but I don't think I would have enough information to predict what that would look like. We right now, being the largest, are able to compete fairly aggressively and recruit the best. Because of the size and opportunities, I don't know how that would change with configuration.
Okay, other comments or questions?
I'd just like to point out how important it is that we determine something that is clear and understandable that's going to be on the ballot. And I think that we owe it to our public to give a clear recommendation. I think our experience with Prop 2 and our ballot, our bond being on the same ballot proved that there is a problem for our public when they see two things that are interrelated on the ballot. And I think that we owe it to our public to do something that's very clear and simple. And I would ask that the problem is that when cities put forward their initiatives, they can self-determine, but there are others that cannot participate in that process. My city is one that has not entered an interlocal agreement. They are relying on the recommendations and wisdom of the board, and I appreciate that. We fought in the city of Orem, we fought long and hard because we did not want to be an Orem-only school district, the same as Lehigh did not want to be a single city district. We fought very hard to keep our city ours. And we also have fought very hard to change the tone of our city leadership. And I would like our efforts to be honored by allowing us to be a part of the vote.
This is someone who hasn't spoken first, if you don't mind. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I would. First of all, I just wanted to mention how excited I am to see so many people that are really invested and interested in creating the best possible option for students. It's exciting to be part of all these groups that are looking at these issues. I also really appreciate the work that MGT did in studying this issue and the staff as well in bringing forth data that is actionable. And I really appreciate that study and honor the work that has gone into creating that study and analyzing the data. And I appreciate the staff and the work that they have done in looking at all these options and coming forth with a recommendation. As I look at what's going to happen in the next 45 days, I believe that much of the data is already available for all of these options. I think that probably the big thing that we will be getting out of the next 45 days is public comment. And as I look for what would be the most effective public comment, I think we need to be focused. I think that if we have one option that we are studying and getting additional public input on, I think that we have a possibility that our public would understand the issue and would be able to weigh in on the pros and cons of that one option. I am less convinced that having multiple options that we are gathering public input would be as effective. I'll put it that way. And so I'm not in favor of putting forth the proposal number 4. First of all, because it did not get a significant support during the MGT study and the surveys we did there. I am in favor of option 3. So that's my opinion.
Okay, other comments? Julie, you want to weigh in? That's a conditional yes.
Yeah, no, it is a conditional yes. I wanted to articulate, I attended 3 of the interlocal meetings yesterday. I attended Cedar Hills, I attended Lehigh, and then I attended the joint work session between Saratoga Springs, Eagle Mountain, and Fairfield. One of the things I noted in particular was that when cities were making motions about their own interlocals, they were making statements about support of others, support of other interlocals. I think that a unanimous vote of 9 municipalities is something that's pretty rare. And it's something where it could easily pit city against city. I want to express my gratitude for the city council members, the mayors in Alpine School District. I've had way too many conversations with a lot of them over the past couple of months as we have looked at what is the best result moving forward. And I have to say, one of the things that I have absolutely valued is the level of collaboration. It very much could have been an us versus them dynamic, and the tenor of the conversations I had was focused on students first, employees second, and third was making sure that communities were strong. And so I just want to convey my gratitude for our local representation. I think it speaks very much to the caliber of people that we have elected, that instead of becoming this is a how much can I get out of this kind of a thing, that the focus has very much been on how to move things forward. So I just wanted to articulate that and what I have observed and participated in. I did want to make a couple of comments about the 4-way. I'm trying not to bring up everything that was already discussed in the work session. I think for one of the things for me is I think there's a concern about districts getting too small, kind of, right? Like, what's the perfect Goldilocks zone of not too big, not too small, but just right? And one of the things that I've been looking at is other districts in the area in Utah, what their sizes are. We have 41 school districts currently in Utah. If we reconfigured in option 4, the central area would be the 6th largest district in the state. The east area would actually be the 9th largest district in the state, and the west side would be the 11th, although we won't stay there. And so as I looked at that and kind of looked at like sister districts that we have across the state and how successful they are, I know there's a level of concern. If we look at all those 41 districts, and this math is going to seem a little bit confusing, but only 8 districts in Utah would be bigger than the smallest of our districts in a 3-way split. So I just want to articulate that as a little bit of a comparison of apples to apples. I have some significant concerns about the MGT study. I have relied on the data that was presented to us. I'm concerned that last week the district came out with numbers that were significantly different. The dynamics in some of those are significant. Some of the west side projections, just like their numbers versus ours, there's a 37% difference. It gets, depending on which set of numbers you look at, then some of the other configurations, the difference is 66%. One of the configurations is 216%, another one's 875% difference. That is giving me a lot of pause. And a lot of, we need to dig a little bit deeper into this, find out where mistakes were made, and make sure that the data that we are sharing with the public is accurate. I think that at the very least, I mean, the feasibility study, the majority of it is basically financial. That is what is required in state code, is financial data. We all know that there are other dynamics that are coming into play with this, like representation, allocation of resources and other things, but the reality is MGT had to present financials. Knowing that those financials are significantly different needs, in my opinion, a deeper dive into that and a greater discussion. I also, when it comes down to it, we have 14 municipalities in ASD. When 9 of them, and I would argue there's a 10th one coming, I believe, it's just, hasn't voted yet. When 10 of our 14 municipalities are saying, this is the direction we're going, I think that we need to continue to have conversations and explore that. And my concern is that if we don't put option 4 forward, we are in direct contention with our municipalities. That is not a position I'm interested in being in. The position later on when we make our vote in July is different than exploring information. And I think it's only going to help taxpayers as interlocals are going on, and I would say running parallel to ours. As those conversations are happening, I think more data is always beneficial to the taxpayer. And one of the things that I am committed to as an elected representative is making sure that we are very, very transparent with our public. I will also say one of the things that I really struggle with is I hate feeling unprepared for things. Getting new information last night or technically this morning at 1 a.m., I struggle with being able to process that amount of information, come up with relevant questions, and then be able to represent my people. So for me, I would prefer that we keep option 4 open. I think that we owe it to our taxpayers. I think we owe it to our cities, and I think that that is what our responsibility is as elected officials, is to make sure that we are transparent and open, and that's the example that I hope that we set.
Okay, a couple of comments for the public. We have from MGT and from other sources probably, 500 pages of documents, maybe more, 600 pages. And we received a lot of that last week. So when people say, I need more time to look at things, you can see why. That we have a lot of information we're trying to look through and we're trying to evaluate. Jason, would you mind if I put you on the spot for a minute, and could you explain to the public why your numbers are a little different from MGT, the metric that you were using when you were determining some of the numbers that on your study in terms of assets, deficits and surplus and so on?
Yeah, we're still looking into their data that their financials, their background, their spreadsheets. The only thing we've had is the 600-page report. So we're trying to see a lot of it. We provided data for them to be able to have a starting point, things that we've already done, and then they took it from there on. We gave them geocode data to be able to see where all the students are. So they did some adjustments, some changes from our calculations. So there are some differences. We're still looking into a lot of them are right on. So like the $12 million surplus for option 1, it's within a few dollars. A lot of them, the expenses may be similar, but the revenue's a little different. So we're trying to dig in to see where their assumptions were a little different. So we're still going through that process to be able to understand. Last week when we presented some new data, one of the examples Julie has in any of the West options, MGT showed a $27 million surplus in FY23. The same calculation that we've done in that is about a $17 million, and then we showed a $5 million surplus because of the change in the overhead cost per student. So it's really finding out that difference between the 27 and the 17. From what we can tell, the expenses match pretty closely, and the revenue, for some reason, they have about $10 million more in revenue in those cases. So we're still trying to figure out where they got to that, how those numbers came.
Could you comment on the overhead costs for a minute? I'm not sure if everyone knows what you mean by that.
Yeah, so in FY23, for the school district are calculated overhead cost per student. So that's all the costs in Fund 10 and Fund 23 that aren't at a school location. So anything here at the district office, transportation, physical facilities. Also, right now, how our district is, all of our utilities come in and are paid at one location, so they're not attributed back to each location. So all those costs are totaled. And
Teacher salary as well, even though the teachers are at the school, that's a cost at the district level.
The teacher cost is at each location, so it's not an overhead cost. And so with each of those, the total cost is divided by the number of students. So for FY23 for Alpine School District, that cost was about $1,935 per student. Other districts, we have a report. Now we don't know on the state report that comes from other districts, they may have a little bit different accounting practices, but we have their data, and so smaller districts, usually that overhead cost is a little bit more per student, just because there's less students in the denominator to divide that out. And so we looked at, what we're doing is trying to see, okay, if there's 20,000 students, what are the 5 districts in the state that are most similar to that, around 20,000, and their average cost per student overhead is about $2,400. For a 40,000 student, it's about $2,200. So there's not a big change from 19, but it's just a lot talking about the economies of scale, how those change just slightly as you get to smaller districts.
Okay, thank you. I hope that helps the public to understand that when MGT calculated all of their scenarios, they used the same overhead cost for every scenario. And that is actually not the way it works. Because if you have, as Jason just explained, if you have fewer students and you're dividing that into the same overhead, then the cost per student is going to be more. So what he has done is look at comparable districts and say, okay, if we have a two-way split and there's this many students this way, this many that way, what is the overhead cost based on the averages for similar districts in the state? And so that is one reason why they're slightly different, is because we're looking at more realistic numbers about what it would actually cost.
Yeah, and even for option 3 with the East, that's about 58 to 60,000 students, and so there's a couple of districts, Jordan and Davis, that have the closest comparable, and they have obviously a lower overhead cost per student than the 20,000 or the 40,000 student ones.
But I also, sorry, I'm going to push back on this a little bit. I mean, part of that too is we're making assumptions. And I guess that's the part where we start playing with the numbers a little bit, which makes me worried. And it's the same thing with the capital stuff. We're making assumptions. And yes, there's definitely, I get that you used averages, but at the same time, there are districts who have a lower admin cost per student than we do. Some of those districts are the same size of districts that we're looking at. I realize there may be a different accounting dynamic, but I think for us to make an assumption that all of the admin costs are going to go up, and they're going to go up by whatever it is, $300, $400, $500 per student, I think that is an assumption that we should not make and categorize that as there's going to be a significant change, because the difference between $27 million and $5 million, I'm going to tell you right now, as someone looking at it through a lens, it looks like the district's pushing an agenda when the money difference is that significant. And it's not just in that one. Every single one of them has differences where it's supposed to be an $8 million surplus, but now it's $1 million, but now you're $8 million in the hole. Like, I get that we're trying to run realistic numbers, but at the same time, by making these assumptions, I feel like it's not transparent to the public. It's super confusing, and we had all of these open houses, we had all of these public feedback meetings based on the data we gave them, and then last week we had MGT come, they put in the exact same data, and then less than 24 hours later we had a meeting and just said, and kind of skimmed over the fact that we think all the numbers are wrong. And to me, I think that deserves a greater discussion with the public, and I think it's a significant issue that we have not addressed.
I don't think by any stretch of the imagination we can say all the numbers are wrong. I think that's a broad picture that's not accurate. Many of the numbers, most of them are correct, and they're based on information we gave them. So I think we need to be careful about creating a false dichotomy here. Here's my question for the board, and something I want you to help me with as I think about this. By having two interlocals basically in place, that is de facto putting option 4 on the ballot, correct? That is already on the ballot. So my question is, do we need to put option
Sir?
4 on the, excuse me, let me finish my statement. Do we need to put option 4 on the ballot from the school district when in fact it is already going to be on the ballot? And I'm not sure we really need to do that, because the public already is going to be working with their own cities and their own communities to make some determinations and to vote on that. And let's say, for example, I mean, Julie's right, there's a lot we don't know, and we're in uncharted territory in many, many, many ways here. This has really never been done before that I know of in the state of Utah. So there are so many unknowns out there and so many what ifs, it's really hard to project what's going to happen. But let's, for a minute, just say if those interlocals did pass by the voters in their communities, they have de facto split the district without the district having any input at all. And so I am not sure we need to put option 4 on the ballot, because in fact it is already on. So board, would you kind of help me think through that a little bit?
Yeah.
And let's keep our comments fairly brief on this.
I'm going to advocate on behalf of Board Member Wilson. She just said that on.
Why don't we let board member Wilson
Well,
advocate for
I'm
herself?
going to also make my point then.
Okay, make your
based
point, but
on
don't,
what-
please don't represent her. She can speak for herself.
She said that with the interlocals, it doesn't allow her area to vote. And so if we ignore option 4, we absolutely don't allow her area to vote. But by us bringing forward option 4, then the communities that are not in an interlocal absolutely have an opportunity to vote.
Ada, will you want to comment on that?
I can't see how that's true.
I want to point out a
If-
couple
Wait,
of.
wait,
I'm-
Ada has the
yeah.
floor, and then to Stacy, please.
I think that there
I
was
know,
a
thank you.
clear expectation as we surveyed our public that they wanted this to be handled in a very careful way by the school board. And I appreciate the fact that you cities have this right, and I understand the pressures that are upon you. But the public expected us to do a careful study. And according to the data that we've collected, the majority want a two-way split. Alpine School District has an 88%, according to the survey, satisfaction, people who are happy with the education their kids are receiving, 88%. And I think as we look at the budget process, I'm on the finance committee. In the year 2023, we had requests for $58 million for budget items with an actual of $28 million.
Ada, are you talking about capital requests?
This is the capital budget, yeah.
It is capital,
Yeah.
okay.
And this year, we had 72 million in requests with only 37 available. We are a financially sound school district, but we are having significant budget impacts, even in a district our size. And I am just very leery of dividing this district into 3 smaller ones in this kind of a financial pressure environment. Our employees know that there is strength in numbers, there is strength with more students and more tax revenue. And with the financial pillars of Lehigh and Orem, that makes a strong base. And so I can't support option 4, which isolates Orem, and really, if we're not part of an interlocal, we do not get to vote.
Stacy,
I want to clarify a few things. So nobody is suggesting that we put option 4 on the ballot today. All today is to decide which options we are moving forward with to study. Quickly, I want to address Board Member Beeson's comment. While I can't speak to what recruiting would look like, I do want to point out that out of 41 districts in Utah, 21 of those districts have under 5,000 students. So that's more than half. and of the, Julie talked about who would be just larger than us. So I am confident that we would be able to keep our teachers. If districts under 5,000 students can do it, I believe that we can. I also want to say to Board Member Clement, I believe that our public, if we give them the information on two different options, I believe that they can sort through the options and make their own decision. I don't think they need us to narrow it down to one option before they even have the opportunity to go through some more information. Also, when MGT first, when it came out, what it was going to look like from them, we'd requested capital information from the beginning, right? So it was my understanding that MGT with operations would be a part of what we looked at, but then we would also consider capital information. We just got that. We didn't even get it comprehensively. So there's that. And in terms of the study, our taxpayers make up a very significant portion of the people who will be voting for this. So we had opportunities for employees, we had opportunities for parents. I do not believe that the majority of our taxpayers have had the opportunity to weigh in yet, and I believe that we owe them that courtesy. And President Hackett, I agree with you, it hasn't been done before, but we have an opportunity here to lead out and to do it well and to do it right. And I believe the most transparent thing to do is to move forward exploring two options, and then we can have a better, deeper discussion later when we determine what we want to send forth to the ballot.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? One point of clarification I'd like to make. Oh, I'm sorry, Jolene.
I just
Go ahead.
want to advocate again for just narrowing down and allowing me to process information. Even the information on the capital plan that I received this morning, I'm still trying to understand the differences I see in what was presented versus the capital plan in January, and the differences on pages 1 through page 3. And so just allowing that process to fully understand the data that's been presented before we eliminate an option.
Thank you. One thing I would like to comment on is when we advance a plan to the county for certification, and then we advance it to the voters, who is studying what? The implication is that we as a district are continuing to study and get new information. But at that point, I would suggest that we have done our study and that we have a lot of information. We've been studying this, or we've been getting information for months, maybe even years, about enrollment trends and about capital needs and all those things. This board is very well informed already, but the public is not. And so one of the purposes of advancing something for this public input period is to give the public a chance to study. The public needs the information. Cities need the information. Individuals, families need the information. Employees need that information. And so when we say we're studying, I don't want to create the impression that Alpine has not done due diligence and that Alpine has not studied it, because that is absolutely not the case. And while the MGT study may not be perfect, it is a good study. And they had a statistically significant number of responses, both in person and online, and we cannot ignore that. If you are a statistician, you know that that is something that you must pay attention to. It is not a bogus study in any way at all. That we have to look at what those voters are saying, but that does not mean that we can't look and we shouldn't look at what other voters are saying. And so the question for us is how to get that information out to more voters. How do we get more input? How do we get correct information out? How do we allow more community members? And our mechanisms are a little bit limited. We cannot buy voter lists and send out mass emails. School districts don't do that. Politicians do that, but we do not. So our mechanisms are in-person open houses. They are our online presence, and where we have feedback buttons and we have plans presented. Right now, any voter in the entire Utah County, whether they're in the district or out, can look. If you go to Alpine School District, departments, you go to business services, scroll down about 5 or 6 entries, historical reports, then you scroll down to 2024 MGT. That information, all, how many pages? 600? 600 pages from MGT plus all of our own data. It is all there. And the question is, how do we get the public there? How do we let them know it's there? And how do we help them understand what they're reading? because they may say 600 pages, I'm not going through that. That's just too much, and it's a lot, and we have been through it. I've got my little book here. This is one of two with a bazillion little sticky notes, and looking at that, saying, okay, what does this mean? What are they saying? What do we need to pay attention to on this? And so the challenge for us, whatever we put forward at this point, is how do we get the public to those open houses? And that's where you can help us. How do we get that information out to a broader audience? If people feel like the MGT study isn't broad enough, how do we broaden that within the parameters that a school district has available? And how do you as cities help us with the parameters you have available? Sarah?
I'm just going to go back a week or last week when we were sitting as a board talking about looking at all the options. And it seems like 2 weeks ago, I know that we had some board members that were very much for option 2. And I was a little surprised last week when we came and all of a sudden it changed into an option 4. And my question then is still had been a question is, in looking at this study, and finding out that that option 4 only had like a 19% support in one area and a 9% in the other. It just wasn't the preferential option that people wanted. And I've had a little bit of a paradigm shift in the last week, and the public knows that, I mean, in the last year and a half, if you would have asked me about a split, I'm like, no, we're great together. And as I have met with over 8 members, mayors and a lot of city council people and talked to a lot of our patrons, I'm seeing that there is a definite need, especially when we talk about the needs and the growth out west. And having grandkids out west and having family out west, I'm very supportive of making sure that we're giving the supports that they need to make sure that we're meeting those needs for growth. When I look at the interlocal, I had a high school teacher. She called me yesterday and was hearing about all these interlocals and expressed concern and was wondering how that was competing with the district. And I guess my paradigm shift has been this. I don't look at the interlocal agreements as competing with us. I feel like this opportunity of being able to study and make a decision that's going to have an impact for generations to come is a heavy lift. And I welcome other entities that are willing to come in and lift up every rock and leaf and look. And I'm committed, like many of you, to work with my city and share data. What are you hearing? This is what I'm hearing. I don't think of this as a competition. I tend to agree with Sarah here and say that if there's an option out there, that's an option that the cities are taking, option 4, let's continue with the process and go with 3, since we know that is something that was more of the preferential from our study. I do agree with Julie. I think that there is some data there that may be a little wonky and that, we want to continue to study and making sure that we understand and we can decipher some differences. And as we move forward, I think I don't anticipate, maybe it's because I know my area, that when I get public feedback, that it's going to negate them sharing anything else that they feel with any other option. I know when we get public feedback, they may go back to other options that we're not even looking at. And so this is really just an opportunity we're going to talk about option 3 and the benefits that is for our school district and for our community. I know all of the concern, all of us are concerned, and I hope this will continue to be putting kids first. One of the things I noticed as a concern from our patrons across the entire district was making sure that we would never disadvantage other students by making this decision, and to not make it political. That was something that was there. And so as we move forward, I'm committing with you that we will work with our cities and find what the right balance is. But I do think that we're able to work with them and find the data that we need between those 2 plans to make the right decision in the end. I think it's going to be okay.
I'd like to clarify a couple of things. First of all, the cities that met yesterday, they were not voting to put an option on the ballot. They were voting to pursue, and right, but so so they haven't decided. So to say we'll study option 3 because they're already putting option 4 on the ballot, that's false. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I also wanted to say, if we're committed to working with our cities, instead of having them have to grammar request or request other things individually, it seems like it would be efficient, and it would also, it would guarantee that we're using the same data and it's not apples to oranges, right? So if we can provide the data for both options, I think that that would be the best idea. I also wanted to clarify.
Clarify again. So my understanding, just making sure we're on the same page, that when cities met yesterday to do the interlocal, they were doing the same thing that we are doing and giving notice that they are putting an option out there, and their option was 4, correct?
No, they're putting they're moving forward on the study, right? So they haven't voted to put it on the ballot, and they're in.
Correct,
But the interlocals are not option 4 because Orem, Linden Vineyard, PG have not interlocaled yet. So if they are only looking at what it looks like for them, then the voters in Orem, Linden, and PG don't have a snapshot of how option 4 would affect them. So we're effectively cutting them off from the information that they need. Thank you for asking for clarification. I also wanted to just give an update. So in our fiscal year 25 budget request, it's 65.4 million were requested for operations and 72,341 for capital. So when the capital budget or requests exceed the operations request, we need to be willing to give people a comprehensive look. So, and President Hackett, in terms of how we get this information to voters, I think we have a lot of options. We have a fantastic communications team that I am confident in could come up with some ideas, and I also know we've had conversations with some of our cities. While they are also specific parameters for them, I do believe that we could, without promoting any particular option, we could get information out when we work together so that we could get to the majority of our citizens, but also say that I don't think that's something that we need to decide on today. So I just urge you to please give the public the courtesy of equal information for options 3 or 4 so that they can best make the informed decision for their families and their communities.
Hey, for the public who's listening who have not read 500 or 600 pages of MGT, there is a section in the front of this particular volume, there's 2 volumes, that attempts to consolidate all of the responses. So if you look at all of the in-person and all of the online, it was over 11,000 responses, and clearly some of those are duplicates because some people went to the in-person and responded, and then they also responded online. So we can't say that's 11,000 individuals, but we can say 11,000 responses. But of that, as you look at the entire aggregate, 49% said they would prefer Alpine to stay as one district. There are some subgroups that were much higher and some that were slightly lower. But across all subgroups and all meetings, the predominant feeling was stay together. However, if you have to divide, 34% said we should divide into 2 districts. Only 17% preferred 3 districts. This is their number 1 choice as you look at the data. Of the 17% who said we should divide into 3 districts, it was unanimous that option 4 was the option that we should consider. So I went back and looked at every single cluster, and I looked at every single, I looked at all the clusters, I looked at all the data, and they were unanimous that if there is a 3-way option considered, it should be option 4. So I want you to know that of those who preferred a 3-way option, that is the one they prefer. There was no support basically for options 5 or 6, but for option 4 there was among that group some support. So I think, that whether or not you agree with their data, I think we have to pay attention to some of these things. And we have to pay attention to, for example, the Skyridge cluster, which said 72% of the people in the Skyridge cluster who responded did not want to go west. They wanted to stay east. And I think we have to honor that. So I think the data, there is some data here that we need to pay attention to. And so I think at this point, if there are no further comments, Ada, you look like you have a comment.
I just
Go
had
ahead.
one further comment,
Go
and
ahead.
that was to say that I put a great deal of credence into the survey portion of the MGT study, just because it is gathered from those who are most involved, connected, either through employment or through having students in our schools. And I believe that they are very informed, the most informed group that we need to listen to. As we look at going broader to a broader audience, I think that that audience is going to be very concerned with the tax burden of this choice. And so that's why I'm very appreciative that our business administrator has gone through the effort to at least give as realistic and a window as could possibly be. In other words, to take out that scale, economies of scale, and to a more realistic picture of what the tax burden would be. So I just want to say that I believe that this data is valuable, and even though it is, certain assumptions, we can't guess what a future board would do. This is our best guess at what the implications would be to our taxpayer, and I think we need to pay attention to this data.
Ada, I agree with you in that the survey data is important, and 60% of those surveyed said that they believe this should be brought to a community vote. So
That is correct.
So, can I finish?
Yes, but I want to just
Let me finish my
illuminate.
statement.
I'm supporting you.
Okay, but can I just finish what I was saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And that was 9,287 people who were surveyed. So when 60% say they want to bring this to a community vote, I want to support that, right? Again, that's a very small number of people that are actually going to be impacted by this. I don't know the number at the moment, but the number of taxpayers in our district well exceeds 9,287 people. We also heard repeatedly when the last bond failed that if it was smaller, I would do this, or if I could, there were a lot of options and things, right? So I think whether this passes or not, we need to give clear information. We need to give people the opportunity. And maybe it fails on all fronts, and then we move forward from there and we determine how we're going to best meet our needs, right? But without giving the community what they've asked for, I think is problematic.
Okay, what I wanted to clarify, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, that was unfun, that was rude, I'm sorry, is if we look at the data, the majority of people said we would like to stay together, but they also said we want this on the ballot. The same people said both. And so what Stacy says is true, that we need to consider that even though they may have said we feel like the best option is one, stay together, we also want to bring it to ballot, and we want to have a voice, and we want to explore other options.
And that was
So
last week's vote, is all of us voted, all seven, that we want to take it to the ballot because
we follow
want
that.
Yes.
Yeah, this board follows that pattern exactly. All seven of us said we want to bring this to the ballot. We may not know exactly, we may not agree exactly on what at this point, but we all agree we need to bring it to the ballot wherever we stand in terms of reconfiguration. Jalen.
I was just going to say that as we've had additional operational money come forward in plans that we received last Wednesday, and as we've had different capital information brought forward, which I say different because it does differ from the January capital plan. So my brain is changing, and so when I pinpoint and stake my flag in the ground that I'm going to go with all of the survey data, and yet my brain is changing and evolving as I have more data, I would like to assume the intelligence of all those that took the survey, that maybe their flag that they put in the ground when they answered the date or the survey may have changed too. And so as we gather that more information, narrowing it down to one solid two-way split and one solid three-way split, and gathering that data and then allowing our public to weigh in on that before we put that final flag and say this is what's going on the ballot, I think that's important.
Thank you. And I think we could all agree with that, can't we? All right. So we have a motion on the table. If I remember right, it was moved by Stacy and seconded by Joy Lynn, that one of the options that we move forward for continued study is option 4. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Do we need to do, it's close. I believe it passed. I believe it did pass. Do we need to do a count? Let's do a roll call. Ada?
Board Member Wilson, nay.
Board Member Lincoln, aye.
Board Member Clement, nay.
Board Member King, aye.
Board Member Hacken, aye.
Board Member Beeson, nay.
Board Member Bateman, aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Do we have another motion to put another option forward?
I move that we put forward option 3.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Ada and seconded by Joy Lynn. Is there discussion, Ada, starting with you on option 3? Now, remember, this is the option the district has recommended. It's a very, very strong option.
I wanted to first of all kind of give a summary of how we got here. In a district that is doing its job well, there's some unfortunate things that have happened. In 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, this board decided not to bond. And consequently, our needs, our capital needs, built up, accumulated. And so in the year 2022, we made the decision that we were going to try to fulfill those accumulated needs, and we put forward a very large bond. That was followed by, in support of the needs of the West and of all parts of the district. That was followed by a very dramatic uptick in inflation. And complicating matters, Orem City government put forward a proposition to make Orem its own district. Those created a perfect storm so that in 2022, our bond failed by 2%. And I think we've also can stir into this a very political agenda that Alpine School District needed to be split for some reason. And I just want to read this statement that was made by a leader in the voucher program, which is a direct competition for education dollars. She said, "I can't say this is a recall of the public education, even though I want to destroy public education. I can't say that. The legislators can't say that because they'll just get reamed over the coals like last year. You hate teachers, that whole thing. They can't have that PR mess. Like, so this is the functional place where we have to live, like where stupid reality is. We are rebranding to, we're all going to be friends and love each other." I think there is a real attack on public education, and the political battles have been brought to education. And I think that for some, breaking up Alpine School District is a part of their political agenda. And I think that I don't want to give in to a political agenda that is not in the best interest of our students or our families or our communities. And I want to point out that this perfect storm, none of that was controlled by board members. None of it was controlled by board members. But it put a very distinct pressure on our schools in the West. And they are feeling that pressure. And I feel that pressure, and I feel a need to meet those needs. I want to publicly say that I am committed to a high school in the West, and that I'm also committed to doing what's necessary to bring our schools into compliance with we have small schools that are not healthy, and I think that those also need to be addressed. I think it's very important what we put on the ballot, as I stated before, and I think that even entertaining something that we're not willing to put on the ballot is going to be confusing to our public. And so I am really disappointed that we're putting two options on the ballot. I am in favor of option 3. It provides for more stability for our employees and consequently for our students, and gives Orem City as well as neighboring cities an opportunity to be a part of the discussion and a part of the vote. So I'm in favor of option 3.
Thank you. Draylin, you were the second. Do you want to make a comment at this point?
Yeah, again, just to clarify, we're not voting to put anything on the ballot today. We're voting to continue to study items to put on the ballot. And then I think my reasoning for bringing forward option 3 is very much the same as bringing forward option 4, is narrowing down from 6 plans to essentially 3 plans, a single district option, a 2-district option, and a 3-district option, to continue to study and really be able to fine-tune what that financial impact, both in operational and capital, is going to mean to the residents of Alpine School District. So I am supportive of bringing forward option 3.
Thank you. Other comments by the board?
I go down a rabbit hole because that's my favorite. One of the things that I hear a lot is, specifically from employees, are a lot of the what ifs. And I've been playing with those what ifs over the past couple of weeks and just kind of wanted to throw out some ideas, because I feel like as we talk about the studies, we get more information, we can also, the more that we can find solutions or look towards solutions, I think that's better for all involved. So I'm going to throw out a couple of ideas that I floated to a couple of board members throughout the last couple of weeks. So as we look at potential district reconfiguration, one of the things that I'm most concerned about is how do we maintain our economies of scale? How do we make sure that more dollars end up in the classroom and in teacher pay, taking care of our employees, less of those things going into infrastructure? So I was having a conversation with someone in the financial industry specifically about OPEB, because I have significant concerns about making sure we honor the retirement commitments that we have made to our teachers. And as we were discussing, options going forward, one of my concerns is that if we break up OPEB into 2 or 3 pieces, it could have negative consequences, because whether you divide it by property tax or student enrollment, it's probably not going to specifically align with the needs in any area. So one of the ideas that this individual and I were kind of tossing around is, what if we just kept OPEB together and then managed by, whether it's 2 or 3 districts, you could have a couple of board members and a BA from each district manage the fund while it's specifically housed in one district, and that if you're an ASD employee and there is a split, regardless of what district you end up in, you still have access to that account and those are paid out accordingly. So if it's something where, hey, it's only 20% of the kids here, but 55% of the tier 1 teachers are in that pool, all of those teachers would receive their retirement benefits. So I think there are ways that we can find solutions. I think that there are ways we can utilize our economies of scale. Another idea that I think is a potential possibility, I know we've talked about bonding a lot, is for potentially, if there is a district split going forward, that we could potentially run a bond in 2025, and each area could take their percentage of property tax. So for example, the west side has roughly 19% property tax. We're just going to run it to 20 for even numbers. So let's say it is option 3, and we run a $200 million bond next year. The east side could take, out of a $200 million bond, $160 million. That could start the AF High rebuild. It could start a rebuild of an elementary school in another area. The west could take their $40 million, which could mean taking care of the service bays, taking care of ATEC West, land acquisition, a district office. So I understand there's a lot of concerns when it comes to the finances. There's a lot of concerns about capital. There's a lot of concerns about the infrastructure pieces. But I guess one of the things that I want to communicate to employees as well as to other board members is I think there are ways for us to be creative and for us to solve problems if we're willing to figure out how to use our economies of scale to benefit everyone overall, and that we can create dynamics where needs are met across the board while also making sure that more and more of those resources end up in classrooms supporting our students and our teachers. And as far as option 3 goes, I'm going to support it in the vote, even though I think it is, based on the current data, not a good dynamic for several of the municipalities, because I'm willing to explore the data.
One of the things we want to maybe share with the public, or I would like to share with the public, is Julie is talking about economy of scale. And Alpine runs lean. You need to know that. Alpine does not have any secret accounts. They're not over padded with administration. We run lean. And right now we have a warehouse that gets great prices because we have so many students. And the prices are so good that Provo closed their warehouse and they order all of their supplies through us. And there are a number of charter schools, it varies from year to year, that order all of their supplies through Alpine because we can get better prices. And so if you look at economy of scale, we lose that when we split. And Julie is suggesting maybe that's not inevitable. There may be ways of retaining that. And some people argue, if you're going to do a series of agreements that we share these resources, then why are you splitting it all? Aren't you better off just staying together? So she's saying no. There are a lot of things to think about here. And there's a lot of balls in the air, and there's a lot of things that we need to look at in depth, and we need to share that information, and we need to get more information from you. So are we ready for a vote, or is there more comments? Stacy, go ahead.
I have a comment.
I promise I won't interrupt.
So I am also supportive of exploring option 3, but option 3 puts my city in a worse position than we are currently in. The number one concern I have from my West Side patrons is that they feel underrepresented. And so in option 3, we are not going to have the representation that we currently have in terms of the West Side being like-minded in our needs and our priorities. So just as some of you feel strongly against option 4, I feel just as strongly for option 3. My voters, they have had decisions made for them because of majority swings another way. Prior to the reconfiguration of our board seats, Julie and I represented 48% of the district. That's 2 people to represent 48% and 5 people to represent 52%. Now we have 3, still different. So I just want to point out that when the number one concern from my people is representation, option 3 is not good for us, but I will support it for the sake of going through and giving people comparison.
Any other comment?
Stacy's brought up the concern about representation, and from my understanding, that was as a result of my lack of support for LRB, the huge LRB for a high school. Is that correct?
I believe that was a factor. It was not the driving force.
But my understanding is that was a factor, as well as the inability that we've had to close. We have closed 3 schools that were running inefficiently, but there was a concern that we're unable to close the others. And I just have to say that we were stopped by a legislative dogpile as well as a lawsuit, that could not go forward. But I would also say that in the LRB that was presented to us for the high school, that was a win-lose situation. And I'm grateful that we paused on that, because we have arrived, I believe, at a potential plan that will be a win-win, and that I am committed to acting upon that in August. I would also point out that my area is representing West Orem and Vineyard. So the perception that Orem presents a threat in a East Unified District is incorrect, because that could be, my seat could be an Orem seat, or it could be a Vineyard seat. It does not give undue power or majority to Orem City. Thank you.
historically, the East Side board members have voted together on different issues. And I will also say that I was in the superintendent's meeting, right, where superintendent so graciously said, we will have meetings the next morning to discuss the options if we are not going to pursue the lease revenue bond at the current time. I said specifically to the board members in that meeting, even if you're not going to vote yes today, can we please still hold the meeting so that the public gets the information? When we noticed the meeting, we had 7 out of 7 board member support to have that meeting, and then it changed. That doesn't look good to our public. Why would you pull that meeting? I specifically said, so you are unwilling, not you, a different board member, to have this meeting and explain why there's a course change here. So it sent a very strong message to the public. Now, the lease revenue bond options waiting, I didn't see those until after it was already decided that we would no longer have that meeting. If that information had come before, that would have been a very different thing. So we can't say that we value transparency and we want everybody to have a clear picture, and then we shut a meeting down before we have the opportunity to explain the different options that have become available.
Okay, I think that particular issue is not germane to this discussion. It is an important issue, and is one that building a high school out west seems to be a trigger of sorts, but there is a lot of support on this board for building that high school. No one discounts the need, absolutely no one. We all see the need, and we all agree on that. And so the discussion that you're having is the mechanism of how to move forward, but that is a different discussion. So that doesn't really pertain to option 3 exactly, directly. So let's move back to option 3 if we can. Are we ready for a vote on option 3? And probably we should do this roll call again to make it clear. Go ahead.
Board Member Wilson, aye.
Board Member Lincoln, aye.
Board Member Clement, aye.
Board Member King, aye.
Board Member Hacken, aye.
Board Member Beeson, aye.
Board Member Bateman, aye.
We are unanimous. The motion passes. Thank you.
May I have a moment of personal privilege, President Hacken?
Yes, go ahead.
I do believe that this is relevant to the conversation because our inaction or lack of action was a significant factor to our cities. If they were not confident that we could not come together on this, that was part of why they came together to do interlocals. So I think moving forward, we all need to realize that when we say we value transparency, that means communicating things clearly. I don't know if it would have gone a different way, but it did very much impact the decision.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Let's move on to item number 2, Superintendent.
Yes, given that the board has determined 2 configurations to study, then we will need a second opportunity for public input for a hearing. We're recommending the date of June 25th, 2024 at 6 p.m. for that public hearing board meeting.
Thank you. Do we have a motion for that?
I move that we designate June 25th as a public hearing / board meeting to be held, yes.
Second the motion.
Okay, is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, let's vote. Can we vote by voice, or do we need a roll call vote? Let's vote by voice. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion passes. Thank you. Dr. Farnsworth.
Yes, the last item on our agenda is, again, given the sequence that we are beginning, we need to act within 14 days of when the 45-day period ends. The July 12th, as we discussed last week in work session, was the most convenient. None of them are too convenient in terms of days, but that time and that date will allow for a greater participation by board members and staff. So we are recommending a board meeting on July 12th, 2024 at 8 o'clock, in which the intended agenda item would be a determination of what option or initiative to recommend for the ballot.
Thank you. Do I have a motion for that?
I move that we set the board meeting for July 12th, 2024 at 8 a.m.
It's been moved by Mark and seconded by Sarah. And just a note for the public, we had to work around people's vacation schedules here. We had a lot of discussion last Wednesday about which date we could actually get everyone together, and there were some board members who made significant sacrifices and significant modifications to their travel schedules in order to be there that day. Do we have comment on this date? If not, let's move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion passes.
All the items.
All right, I think,
I move that we adjourn.
thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
You had me worried there for a minute, guys. It's been moved by Ada and seconded by Stacy Anmark that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Thank you. We did a good job today. We made some important decisions and we will move forward accordingly.